Sonic Frontiers has been out for almost 2 months as of writing this. Actually, as of recording this, it's already January. Middle of January. When I have this upload, it's probably going to be February. But hey, hopefully this recording is able to do a lot better than before, so... The story starts off with the main characters, Sonic, Tails, and Amy, heading towards Starfall Islands, because that's where the Chaos Emerald has been located, and where Eggman's supposedly going to be at from a battle they previously had with one of his robots in the prequel comic. Side note, no matter how much I love that prequel animation with Knuckles, don't make prequel comics or animations unless you put them in the game. Because sometimes there's just important information that just gets left out in these prequel adaptations. And when that could easily be put inside the game. Besides, then again, it's not as bad as like Sonic Forces, where that game was literally 6 months later and Eggman took over the entire world. Well, they had a bunch of like random comics that were supposed to tell you how all of this even happened to begin with. So, at least Frontiers doesn't have that bad of an issue. It's really just how Knuckles got here. But I don't know, I still would just like it to see these little prequel stuff still be added to the game, just for the sake of like, I don't know, telling a complete story without having to like go into outsourced material for that complete story. I get why a movie doesn't do it, unless we're talking about DVD and Blu-ray releases, but for something like this, I would at least appreciate it. While at the same time, Eggman uses an AI to access the Ancients' tech, but accidentally gets trapped in cyberspace, a place created by the Ancients to store their memories and all that other stuff. While at the same time, with the AI being stuck inside of cyberspace, it soon transformed it into a more sentient being, which is referred to as Sage, who tries her best to protect Eggy and the Starfall Islands for reasons we don't fully understand until later into the game. And while this is happening, she decides to seal away Sonic and his friends into the Starfall Islands' cyberspace. Sonic somehow was able to break through the cyberspace seal. We keep on hearing that he's the key or something, and I assume this was the end, telling Sonic that, oh, just continue on your journey and you'll be able to save the day. It's a pretty interesting plot twist, except they never really like focus on it, so it's why it kind of gets confusing and why some people think that it's Sage talking to us when we hear that deep female AI voice. When in all honesty, it sounds more like the end if you ask me.
Destroy the Titans. Tear down the walls between dimensions. You fly about me like a gnat. I am inevitable. I cannot be denied.
But since that he's free now, he decides to head off through the islands to figure out what's going on and how to free his friends. First off with Amy, which immediately we start getting into this like major question.
I mean, it's grassy.
Yup, but I've seen this kind of recovery in areas Dr. Eggman damaged.
What's up with the gloominess? The character seems a little bit more gloomy this time around. Thankfully, they aren't written out of character at the very least, but it's still weirdly gloomy that I just can't understand why. I assumed it was because that while they were trapped in the cages, they were reliving all their memories, since cyberspace is all about storing memories, and all the levels are formed from Sonic's memories. We'll get to that later, but it's never explained to us that that's what's happening. So it feels a bit more out of place than it actually is what's going on with these characters or whatever. Which is probably why a lot of people doesn't like how Amy's no longer bright and bubbly in this game for whatever reason.
You hanging in there, Amy? Is your condition, well, I don't know, uncomfortable?
It's certainly unsettling, but it makes a big difference being able to at least talk to you. Before you freed me, I couldn't see or hear anything clearly. It was like looking into a kaleidoscope that was always shifting. I couldn't tell if I was coming, going, or moving at all. I'd have gone crazy if you hadn't gotten me out.
Yeah, you're tough. I know you'd have hung in there. Still, I'm glad I could get you out. And I'm not gonna stop until you're back to normal.
And while I liked her being bright and bubbly, I'm not that angry about her not being like that. I know that sounds weird, but Amy had more to her character than just simply being bright and bubbly. Like, they could have tried expanding upon her helping out others or being this so very supportive character. And something that she still is inside Frontiers.
Don't get too far ahead.
Maybe we should just let them wrap it up on their own.
We have to see this through.
We still haven't found Tails. We've been wrangling children and taking detours the whole way.
Are you telling me you would leave behind someone in need?
No, but I'm also worried about you. You can't help anyone if you're stuck in limbo.
She's just not as bright and bubbly about it, and I think that's fine because the last game was Sonic Forces, an entire world-expanding war. Something that it makes a lot of sense why not just Frontiers Amy, but IDW Amy to be a lot more serious and grown out of, because it was such a dramatic event for a lot of these characters that you would expect that. I know that sounds weird because that would have been retroactive for these characters, as that never was actually explained or shown in the series, and I know a lot of people would love to see Sally come back and have the role that Amy has now. Still, it just doesn't really make much sense that after a war, these characters would act the same exact way they did before. You would expect them to at least grow a bit. Another thing about Sonic's friends is how they have a relationship to the Coco. Coco inside Easter Islands represents their personality. Amy specifically has it represent her love for Sonic. It's a little Coco who has a love for her hero Coco. Very end, they kind of have like a very sorrowful end to their lives when they finally be able to express that love, because that's what happened to them after the war. These Cocos are kind of like reliving the experiences of what their original people were. Which makes a lot of sense because the Starfall Islands is all about the memories of these people. Throughout these islands, as he runs through them, gaining the Chaos Emeralds, becoming super and destroying these robots, he encounters Sage, who tells him to no longer continue on his little adventure because he's just dooming everyone else and the entire world. Because of reasons we do not fully understand yet. Which leads into a major issue I have with the story. She's constantly telling him to not be on this island. He's just dooming them all, but it's never exactly explaining what that is. Never exactly like that, as going to skip through the plot a bit. Fourth Island is so short due to the fact that all it is just a bunch of lore explanations. Just simply explaining what the heck is going on, like a giant Kirby mouthful mode of random lore pieces we should have been able to know about earlier in the story. But since we're all being shoved them now, they don't really have the time to really sink in, really have us think about these events. Like, sure, we do get snippets of these with Sonic and his friends, but they don't explain as much of what's going on. Only until the fourth island where we got to learn more about, what, and it's like, why? Why couldn't we learn about this stuff earlier? I get why Sage was doing this. Sage wanted to protect Eggman, and Eggman didn't want to have Sonic associated with him or whatever, even though she constantly tries recommending him that they do work with Sonic. So it makes sense and all, but it just doesn't feel like that should have been the direction they took. I feel like that Eggman should have been a lot more willing to work with Sonic earlier into the story, or Sage just simply went against his little, or whatever he's doing or whatever. Maybe that probably wouldn't work for like the context of the story, but it just, already as it is, it just could have at least gotten like another island just so we can have that all sink in. Going back to where we were in the story, every time Sonic destroys one of these cages, he saves one of his friends, but he also gets corrupted by the energy exuded from these cages. It isn't much at the very beginning after saving Amy, but by the time he gets corrupted by Tails' cage, he's so weak and just literally shouldn't be able to take it anymore. He even starts being all weak in-game, which is a cool detail, and I very appreciate they showed that, but wow, it really shows how badly this affects Sonic. Hopefully they don't just simply huddle in a circle and completely delete it from existence. By the time Sonic has finished the first island, he headed toward the second island where he would save Knuckles. And not gonna lie, the game continues the entire trend of Knuckles being a good character again that was set up by the second Sonic movie. And it's just so nice seeing Knuckles in character. Once again strong, a little stoic, observant of his tribe's history, and a fun, friendly rival to Sonic.
So hurry up and get me back to normal.
Anything to get you away from me.
It's in Sonic Frontiers, he wasn't perfect though, because there's one thing that didn't really make sense is how he acts like he always is alone when guarding the Master Emerald.
Ages ago, my people were wiped out by a cataclysm. I know the Kogo faced something similar. It reminds me I'm the last Echidna, that I'm alone.
You may be the last, but you're not alone. You've got us, Knucklehead.
I'll admit, I do envy your lifestyle. Freedom to go where you want, when you want.
So do it. Get out there and live a little.
Maybe I could. But first, I need to be back to normal.
Which, I love this conversation that Sonic has with Knuckles. It really shows how much Sonic is still caring about his friends, and it doesn't really make much sense, sadly, because, well, Sonic Heroes, Sonic 06, Sonic Riders, Zero Gravity, Sonic Rewriters, Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost World, Sonic Colors, yes, and so on and so forth, which ruins the validity of this cutscene. Like, sure, you could see it as, like, there's big gaps in time between each of the Sonic games when it comes to, like, the more tense-year ones. But then again, there's still Sonic games like Sonic Riders where he's still hanging out with Sonic and Tails. Like, sure, we aren't given an explanation of why he's hanging out with Sonic and Tails and Sonic Riders, but at the same time, we're not given an explanation for why he's hanging out with Sonic and Tails and Sonic Riders, so exactly what is he doing there? I mean, there's a reason why we have that constant joke in our community that, oh, Knuckles is just so much of an idiot that he constantly gets the Master Emerald stolen because he's never guarding the gosh darn thing. Because, well, that's what it literally is like. He's barely ever guarding it, and we barely ever see the Master Emerald to begin with until, like, Sonic Frontiers, where it finally made its grand return. So overall, it's not a perfect addition to Knuckles' little arc in this game, because it just doesn't really make much sense. After the second island, once again having Sonic go supersonic and do his supersonic-y business, we get to head to the third island, where we save Tails. Tails is honestly the most interesting three out of the characters, and is also the character that makes me believe that these characters are reliving their memories, and it's why they are a lot more moody or whatever. Does it make much sense? No. Is it explained in the story? Heck no. But, I don't know. It just makes a little bit more sense why Tails would be acting like this, as he's acting like he's a burden to Sonic. Even though he wasn't acting like that while they were on the plane, clearly showing that this is completely new, but it still has a pretty good conversation between Sonic and Tails.
Well, that's it. The canon is complete.
Did I get the wrong parts?
No. Their hero didn't show. They're worried something's happened. It's like how I couldn't handle it after Infinite attacked. One wrong turn and I fall apart.
Whoa, what?
Listen to me. The others are counting on you. I'm here to help, so don't give up, okay?
You've got me worried, Tails. You want to talk?
Not right now. Let's just focus on finding the emeralds.
All right.
Honestly, not gonna lie, seeing how caring Sonic became after hearing Tails said that is so sweet of him to do. I just love it. And it doesn't even end like this either, as a few cutscenes later,
Sonic, am I a burden to you?
Wow, and how did you come to this well-thought-out concern?
Whenever there's a crisis, I'm either running away or standing on the sidelines.
You're always rescuing me when all I do is follow you around.
Hey, who was it who stopped Eggman from blowing up Station Square, huh? And who broke me out of prison, or saved me from the Deadly Six's trap?
Then I'm wildly inconsistent.
Dude, relax. You've got brains like Eggman, speed like me, and can fly with your butt. It's okay if you still need help sometimes. That's just part of growing up.
When did you get to be so insightful?
I have my moments.
I honestly really like this cutscene, how Sonic is trying to convince Tails that he's not a burden and is truly a hero. And after that cutscene, we see Tails becoming a lot better, becoming a lot more believing in himself and all that. And I really like that. Honestly, I feel like the Tails' character arc in this game definitely made him one of my favorite Sonic characters. Sure, I always liked him, but I always feel like there was just something off about Tails that always made him like never one of my favorite characters, because they didn't properly continue that character arc from Sonic Adventure 2 and 1. Sure, Tails does have a pretty good character arc in Sonic Riders, and I definitely love him there just as fine. But aside from those games and a few others, there wasn't really many games that I really liked Tails in. He kind of just more so exists just to be the tech kid, and that's it. And I think that's a very big missed opportunity, because they could really follow up that character arc or whatever, but they just kind of like don't really do much with him. Heck, even when he's not even being sidelined, heck, when he's a playable character, he still sometimes feel like he's just the tech-wid scientist or whatever. Or the little kid inside Sonic Heroes' case, but that's a different story. Overall, I never really was that huge of a fan of Tails, but seeing how he was treated in this game really makes me love Tails in this main series once again. And I really hope that they continue on that character arc. Heck, a part of me kind of wishes we could get like a Tails Adventure remake or something, because to be honest, Tails Adventure is one of my favorite video games of all time, or at least one of my favorite Sonic games or handheld games. So I would love to see that game to come back getting a remake, but I highly doubt that too, but hey, I can dream. So after the cutscene where Sonic helps Tails feel better, we then get into a cutscene where Sonic is checking up on Tails. And this is where we see a scene where we actually get to learn about Sage's relationship with Eggman. And just seeing these two characters hanging out with one another, she just starts to cry. All she really wants is just to have a more proper family bond. And thankfully she was able to develop one with Eggman over the course of the game. But most of it isn't really seen. You see, with the game being rushed, a lot of stuff like the relationships between Eggman and Sage had been cut, and all we get to see is like these egg memos where we get to see how Eggman truly gets to develop and fully loves Sage like she's a daughter of his. And honestly, I just think that's very weird. Like, this is a pretty important part of the story close to the end of the game, because Eggman feels really sad about Sage and even, spoiler alert, save her from actually being completely deleted. But yet, most of this plot element just simply isn't shown to us completely. And it just feels wrong not being able to properly get to see these characters grow a relationship, when that's the entire point of between these two characters. Heck, why Eggman would even be in this game aside from setting things up. After the third island, Sonic would head to the fourth island, Rhea Island, where he would take down multiple different towers and learn about the past of the Chaos Emeralds and the Agents. Until we get to the very last tower, where he has fully getting corrupted and now has lost control of his body. Now his friends and enemies has to watch him just stand there being completely corrupted. Or we'll just huddle in the circle and say some nice things to bring Sonic back to life. I have no idea why they decided to go with this. Again, I think it's a sign that they rushed the game, because I could certainly tell that they had a lot more in store with this little plot idea. But it completely goes away and just has like no actual stakes put onto it. While this is going on, the end is finally released. And it's kinda anticlimactic. Sure, we get to learn about the end and how powerful it is and all that stuff, but it just comes out of nowhere. It just comes at the very end of the game. You don't really get to see much stakes of the end in the actual, gameplay. I mean, they could have just made it red or something, or had the end summon, a bunch of uniquely designed enemies that are specifically based off of it. Maybe you had to, explore all the islands instead of just simply go through one of them. I don't know, I feel like there could have been a much better way of, including the end to the story. I know they were trying to build up to the end, but I felt like it was a little bit quick at the end and just made it seem like it just right out of nowhere. Like I said before, I felt like there should have been at least another island so we get a little bit more lore with the story and all that. But also, I feel like there's also another way you could try, much better improve upon the end when it comes to the way it relates to the story. It's my idea. The end is actually using Sonic's corruption as a vessel of leaving the world. Every single character who has a cage, the end also has a cage as well. But due to how large the end's cage is, everyone else's cages were inadvertently connected to the end's. So whenever they were released, the end had these little holes that was able to crawl out of and be able to attach itself to Sonic. Or maybe it could have just simply be loose inside cyberspace in general, and whenever Sonic messes with cyberspace, he creates these little holes that the end will go through and corrupt Sonic through. Either way, it kind of makes the corruption a little bit more interesting if we think of it as the end using Sonic for its own gain. And closer to the end of the game where Sonic's completely corrupted, that's when the end is escaping from cyberspace completely and is able to destroy the world now. Even when Sonic gets uncorrupted, it's too late. The end was already freed when Sonic has freed himself of the corruption. I think this could help the end be a little bit more interesting, as you could do something more with the idea of the end using Sonic as some kind of a scapegoat. Maybe you could have Sonic getting specific thoughts from the end, something like that. Speaking of which, you're probably wondering about the entire origins of the Chaos Emeralds thing that I mentioned earlier. You see, the Chaos Emeralds are actually alien rocks, which goes against the story and goes into a completely another issue I have with this game's story, and that is the weird inconsistencies in its lore. Sure, it's not entirely bad, as there can be some theories that can be made to explain this. The creatures that the ancients were are actually related to chaos, which makes no sense unless you think that the ancients evolved into Chao, and then the Chao evolved back to chaos. Or, well, the Chao mutated into chaos, but you get what I mean. But that still does bring up one question I still am very confused about. How in the heck is, the Chaos Emerald space rocks when they should have been there on Earth the entire time, protecting the world with Light Gaia? Because that's the entire lore of the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic Unleashed. They were from Earth at least the entire time since its creation, since that Light Gaia had to use the Chaos Emeralds to be able to defeat Dark Gaia. Maybe the ancients got there right when the planet's created? I don't know. It's just doesn't really make much sense to me at all. And it's a very weird addition to the story. I feel like this is just another case of the game being rushed and its story just suffering from that. Besides, what makes it worse is that the Chaos Emeralds were advertised to Sonic fans during interviews that there would be explained about their origins, and we barely got any of that. All we got was just more questions about what their origins were. How are they related to Dark and Light Gaia? How are they related to Master Emerald? Is the Master Emerald actually a fusion between the 7 Chaos Emeralds like it is in Sonic movie or something? Are there really still multiple Chaos Emerald sets that we just don't know about? I don't really have any idea on how they could try improving on this or something with the DLC, which I know you're probably thinking that, well, we're getting DLC. If they're going to be making DLC for the game, they can easily fix some of those questions in there. And I'm like, you do realize that's content we're getting after the game come out. if there's stuff for the game that is supposed to be there since the very beginning, or at least was advertised for the game, you would expect it to be there day one, instead of just simply not being there. Besides, I shouldn't have to wait until the future for a game to start becoming good, because that just shows how badly the game was originally rushed. Yeah, sure, the game would be good now than it would be compared to before, but because you fix some issues about what the game is now doesn't really change my opinion on the way it was back when it came out. Okay, now I'm starting to sound like I actually hate this game, which I actually don't. And heck, I didn't even talk about the gameplay yet, but still, you get what I'm trying to talk about, right? So, do I think the story is amazing, or good, or bad? Well, I wouldn't really say the story is bad. I think the story actually does do some pretty decent things to actually make it a bit more interesting. I think that the issue with the story is just that it isn't really properly handled. Sure, the characters are written fine, but I felt like they could have better included their arcs during this game. I felt like it would have been better if they just simply tried better incorporating the lore into earlier parts of the story. I would have also appreciated seeing more of Sage and Eggman's relationship to see them actually grow as a family. But yet, a lot of that isn't really put into this game's story, and I just don't really like it that much. It's not a bad story, and there's things I really liked about it, but I wish it was a little bit better handled, just so things felt a little bit more cohesive and not be very rushed with its inclusion. When you enter an island, you have multiple different objectives you can do. Most of the time, though, it makes sense to start off going to the beacon and activating it by doing a little minigame. Doing this would actually reveal a bit of the map associated with the beacon. I think. I mean, a lot of the squares they show can sometimes just be very far away from the beacon itself, and there's even sometimes squares that are still blank in between that beacon squares that it's showing. Speaking of those mini games, I didn't really care for most of them. The only ones I really cared for were the timer ones, as those tend to have the most fun and challenge put into them, and aren't the dreaded knock ball into hoop challenge. Which, I understand it might require some timing and placement to score a goal with the ball, but in my opinion it's still very janky, as it's really hard to tell where a ball is going to be launched, if it launches at all. Oh yeah, I forgot it. These things. These are awful. The nighttime challenges are really bad, as they require you to just circle random lights that appear out of nowhere, and that's it. That's all the challenge. You just have to constantly get all the lights side looped, and there you go. You beat the nighttime challenge. Which, just so you know, you have to do this at night, which requires you to just stand around doing nothing, or hopefully you can do something that doesn't take up too much of your time, so you can easily run back and be able to complete this. Aside from those two, and a few I'm probably forgetting, these challenges are way too easy and just feel like they don't challenge me at all. And what's even worse is how basically none of them really is Sonic-y like, aside from anything that reuses a gimmick from a previous Sonic game, which in and of itself isn't really that interesting on its own, and the time attack challenges. Oh yeah, there's also the glowing platforms that also appears in Rise of Lyric. I don't know why they brought them back, but hey, I love obscure references, so I don't really care. You might have noticed that Sonic has a new ability called the Psyloop. Yeah, I don't really care for it. All it really is used for is doing puzzles and doing combat. If you ask me, the Psyloop is one of the more boring new abilities this game has introduced. It's not like it doesn't have potential, but circling random objects over and over again really doesn't make it a fun new ability. It does get a quicker version that can be helpful for combat, but because of the issues I have with the combat already, that I'll get into later, I never found the use for this ability and completely forgot about it. That's why I'm not showing any footage of it. Even though this game is an open world, open zone game, you don't really have much freedom. The reason for that is because this game has constant hand-holdy level geometry that doesn't really have any challenge put into them and constantly gets in the way. The most they really have you do is simple timing and homing attacks. They do add more and more elements as you go on, but it doesn't really get much harder. You just need to know what the object does. Sure, as someone who doesn't really care for very hard games, I kinda intermediate about it, I guess. I am completely using that word wrong, and I don't even know because I don't even know English. But that doesn't change the fact that these still very simple and doesn't really have any substance to them. Heck, in my opinion, their real purpose is to help you get from place to place or grab a random item, like a memory token for story progression or whatever else. And that's fine, but I never thought these were fun, as most of the control is taken away in these automated segments, with the occasional easy to deal with obstacle. And what's worse is that they look very out of place on these very basic realistic looking islands. Sure, I guess it does make sense that they are out of place, as they were pretty much just put here through the cyberspace powers or whatever that were created by the ancients. But it just still doesn't really look right. Even then, I'm not even much of a huge fan of the realistic islands themselves. That's not me saying I don't like the realism in Sonic, but all these islands are very basic in their theming, with the only note of interest being the ruins. Even then, I really didn't care to explore these islands or the ruins, when they are mostly the same thing. And whatever might be interesting, get these boring cutscenes describing them. Like, sure, I do have to admit that some of the jokes and commentary or whatever that's involved with these cutscenes are pretty likable, but to be honest, if you ask me, a lot of these cutscenes are very boring because the animations is just, well, I could say they're better than Sonic Adventure's stock animations, but that's kind of it. The only exception to all these ruined things is the tombs, which I actually think are pretty cool, but they're not exactly perfect or even that cool because, well, again, there's still pretty much a good amount of automation put into them. And even without the ruins, the islands, they're mostly just basic grasslands, basic desert with a canyon, or basic islands with a volcano and ice mountain. Okay, to be fair, Chaos is probably the most interesting looking island out of all of them for those reasons. Heck, it even has some destroyed elements from Sonic Forces, which is a very cool way to demonstrate continuity with that game, even though that's Sonic Forces. But even then, don't even get me started with how Rhea and Reynos, the last two islands, are literally just part 2 and part 3 of Chronos, sharing the same theme, Rhea literally being attached to Chronos, and having this huge amount of dead space in the map, which clearly shows that some corners were cut. It kinda makes it easier to tell that even more corners were cut when they start reusing bosses and pretty much just have the entirety of Chaos Island just be the most uninteresting level geometry wise island out of all of them. Like, seriously, there is so many 2D sections. Heck, there's so many 2D sections, even the beacons that would give you rewards if you just simply side loop around them. Now they would sometimes create these random speed panels that would easily launch you into random 2D sections you don't even want to. And even then, weirdly enough, they don't even stay speed panels. They sometimes could just revert back into a chest state. So if you forgot it was a speed panel at first place, well, you're going to be launched to that 2D section again unless you're able to react fast enough. Granted, then again, getting out of these 2 sections isn't that hard, but still. Which pretty much just gave me no reason to really just go out for all these tests, because for all I know, they probably just sent me to a random 2D section I did not find fun at all. And again, they reuse bosses from previous islands. Like, it's fine bringing back previously existing bosses to make them harder or whatever, but Squid is the exact same thing it was back in the previous island. I mean, sure, Squid does have this cool association with the major boss of the island. That's actually pretty cool, not gonna lie. And with all these cut corners, it kinda explains why there were some issues, like with how the story was written at the very end, why the fourth island is so basic. Again, the multiple different duty sections in Chaos Island. Honestly, I feel like all these issues were just simply caused from the game getting all of its corners cut. Sure, it's a Sonic game, but man, I feel like that this game could have definitely would have been better with had more development time. Maybe that's why a lot of the time when this game is advertised, it's supposed to be like this new way to introduce new gamers to Sonic, or having a lot of modes that makes this game a lot easier. Probably because they realize how easy the game it is already, so they just simply, well, hey, if it's going to be an easier Sonic game, why not just use it as the introduction to many different Sonic fans? We could even reuse level design and just have it be easier, just so when players go back to like previous Sonic games, they already recognize that level design and just be like, oh, okay, maybe I can actually do this level, you know? Anyways, there's my cyberspace talk before I actually start talking about cyberspace, and I will talk about cyberspace a bit more later. But overall, when it comes to the map itself, I'm not exactly a huge fan of it. A lot of the time, there's just random level geometry, mini games that I just don't really care for, and just islands in general just can't really make me feel any interest about. I'm sorry, I just don't really care about these islands. Ironically, I actually care about the cyberspace a lot more than these islands. Now, it might seem like I just don't like Sonic Frontiers, especially that I constantly talk about how it's very easy and casual. But the thing is that there's nothing really wrong with being easy and casual. I mean, look at Kirby games. They're easy and casual all the time. It's just that when it comes to Kirby and comparing it to the open zone of Sonic, it's not really similar when it comes to substance. And this is just half of the open zone too. I'm just talking about the one you explore. There's still stuff like bosses and enemies and combat that I still need to get into. But I think that the open zone itself is perfectly fine for being very casual, as I don't really think there is a need for making actually exploring the world have a lot of substance. Again, you're just exploring an area. As long as there is still other stuff about the open zone that's still fun, like the level design and unlocking the map, or at least one of those two things, then I wouldn't be entirely against it. And what's funnier too is that I'm not even done with all the island spiel, because there's still the memory tokens and the bosses I have to take care of. So, as you run through the little obstacle courses, the most common reward you get is a memory token. These are used to progress through the story, access extra cutscenes with the character of the island and or stage, and save your friends when first entering the island they're in. Which, for story purposes, it doesn't really make much sense. Okay, using them to free your friends makes sense, but why can't I just talk to them normally without the memory tokens? I know this is probably not canon and just a gameplay element, but it's still weird seeing Sonic give Knuckles a bunch of medals, but yet the cutscene starts like Sonic just got there. Speaking of Knuckles, I do enjoy how each of the characters have their own memory tokens. Amy has hearts, Tails has wrenches, Knuckles has medals, and Sage has... gosh darn it, another rushed element. She has hearts again. Okay, maybe they could actually represent her love for Eggman, which, not gonna lie, if you at least are able to reuse elements you already coded into the game in a way that's clever, that's fine, and sure, I'm just gonna leave it at that. As you're talking to some of your friends during these cutscenes, you're sometimes put into these random mini games. One has you cut grass, one has you take stacks of cocoa to Knuckles, one has you skydiving off of a bridge, which is possibly devilish, ha 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 ha, etc. With each of them increasing in difficulty as you go. Also, side note, I kind of want to mention this one because I don't think there will be a chance for me to mention it again. But there's this weird mini game where you have to be pushing a bunch of herd of Coco, sword and shield style, which isn't why it's weird, nor that they poop out a sandstorm bomb that makes them completely invisible, No, it's that there's weirdly invisible walls around Sonic that only affect Sonic. And thanks to how the Coco becomes invisible, not just you miss a Coco, but you can accidentally softlock them on the other side of the invisible wall, preventing Sonic to even reach them. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times this messed me up on one playthrough and had to restart the entire mission over and over again. Oh my gosh.
It was only 3 times, so don't ask why this Wordo's exaggerating.
Also, side note, there's also a pinball minigame where you can score for points in and try gaining enough for you to continue. I only wanted to mention it as it's very out of place from only appearing once in the game. And also, I love how it's so random that even Sonic questions it.
Hey, I've seen my fair share of pinball machines. I know one when I see one. Were those really part of the original ruins? I mean, the tech here outpaces Eggman's and is older than old. I guess the love of pinball predates civilization.
And oh yeah, this is also where we're introduced to the space shooter minigame on Chaos Island, and would be a reoccurring theme throughout the hacking minigames and final boss. All you do is switch modes to shoot black or white bullets, and yeah, that's kinda it. It's nothing special, but it is really hard in the final boss though, since I don't play space shooters, so yeah. Sonic has new combat abilities and Frontiers, an entire moveset that involves spamming attacks after using a homing attack. Okay, to be fair, it's not that simple. Sonic is able to use his boost, which is actually tied to some of the combos, and he can also parry to leave an opponent wide open for a counterattack. You can even unlock a move that activates after a parry. On top of that, you can also use the side loop to break shields or launch them into the air for combos. Yeah, I don't really care for it. The combat in this game isn't terrible, but it's very uninteresting. With all of its attacks being very samey and spammable, I did still enjoy some attacks like the Cyclone, but it never felt like there were any specific moves I should use to dodge my opponent's attacks. Just spam and win. And even though I can parry and dodge attacks, dodging is pretty useless when you realize how OP the parry is in this game, as it can go on for like forever, even in the air. And because of that, I never felt like trying with the combat after accidentally turning on auto combat early into my playthrough. Like, sure, I did try at certain points, but it just kinda was boring doing it. The only one I really did was, again, the Cyclone attack, which still was really fun to me, just because of the visual element to it. Heck, I didn't even care about the combat so much that a lot of the time, I just tend to avoid any enemies that comes near my way. Like, sure, I could attack them, but really though, I thought it was just more fun just to simply avoid them, as there wasn't really much of an incentive to fight them, and the combat's so boring that there's not even a point to fight them. And even though I explored the island a bunch, grabbing a bunch of different collectibles and whatnot, I barely got any upgrades for the speed, attack, ring, and defense things that Sonic has. Just because, again, I didn't really care for it. Yeah, sure, the enemies do get harder along with the bosses, but all you get from defeating enemies is experience points, which can be used to level up Sonic's moveset. But the thing is that this thing fills up so quickly, I pretty much had the entire moveset completed when I was at the 3rd island. Even though that should have been a 5th island thing. Also, side note, I even started avoiding a lot of the mini bosses as well, since most of them didn't really have anything fun going on with them with the combat or gimmick to really go back to. And yes, I did say gimmick, as in each of the bosses and enemies has specific, mini games that would lead into a mindless barrage of combat sessions until the enemy is defeated. The only exceptions being Ninja and Tower, and all of your different upgraded versions along with your basic enemies. but the basic enemies are so easy to destroy that I can't really care. Tower just spams a bunch of attacks in. Okay, sure, Ninja's actually pretty fun, but it's still very easy to just spam parry, which again ruins a lot of the challenge that Ninja might have because, well, it's just spam parry. And also, speaking of bosses I also really like Sumo as well. Again, he's just a mindless barrage of combat, but he's actually kind of fun with his gimmick where you have to try like bouncing off of the little ring to try knocking Sumo right into the electric part of it without you accidentally knocking yourself into it, which is very fun and I really like doing it. Easily one of my favorite bosses in this entire game, even though it's very short, very simple. Another issue I have with a lot of these bosses and enemies is simply for the fact that Sonic has this blue boost mode, which all it is just simply running in circles, constantly getting a bunch of rings until you max it out, and then Sonic's able to go into movie Sonic mode and just rolling around at the speed of sound, even though there's no momentum, so I'm just running. Why am I even singing this so terribly? I don't even know why. Honestly, when it comes to this, sure, going fast is really fun to do, but the issue is that it makes the bosses so much easier as you have a constant way to refill your ring count just by simply running in circles over and over and over again. You can even get memory tokens or experience points from doing that, making the enemies even more useless because simply I'm just over here just spamming Psylube just so I can get 400 rings and then accidentally give myself the next upgrade. Like, seriously, I shouldn't be able to do that, but yeah, I'm able to do that. Like I said before, I feel like a lot of these elements that makes the game a bit easier were just added because the game was already easy to begin with and decided that since not many Sonic games were playing it, it will be a good starting point to try getting more non-Sonic fans into Sonic. Okay, so I'm entering the first level for the first time. Oh man, I cannot wait to play.
Here we go!
Wait a minute, something's not right here. Oh yeah, Sonic's voice is Jason instead of Roger. Ah, man, that took me a second to realize that. Aside from the fact it's also a different game. Also, you might have noticed I'm using the exact same footage, and heck, I even made new footage just for this next section of the video just so I can have more footage to use of these bosses that actually show off the combat. Which, yeah, that's pretty much exactly why I'm using this footage over and over again. I honestly wish that most of the bosses really were more so half and half. Like, one half we had combat bosses and the other one being minigame bosses. Because, I mean, it's fine to have the minigame bosses, so why not just keep them? But at the same time, though, it just feels like it's very lacking when it comes to the actual combat itself. Maybe because, like, the combat itself is not really that fun to begin with. But, wait. I haven't actually tried criticizing it. All I did is just complain about it. You know what? I'm going to give my own criticism for these, explaining things that I think would make them better. So like I said earlier, I would like to have a bit of a balance between minigame bosses and combat bosses. Because again, I don't mind the minigames, they're fine, and some of them are pretty fun. Like I said before, Sumo is one of my favorite bosses. And even love certain bosses for their ideas, like what Squid tried to do, or what Ashura tried doing. And honestly, I feel like that there could be more and more bosses that has more interesting gimmicks. But to be honest with you, I think that as the game goes on, more and more bosses gets less and less interesting when it comes to those mini games. Or again, they're repeating previous bosses from previous islands. So to fix that, I would just simply not repeat any of the bosses unless it's a new boss type, and or actually make new bosses that has more interesting mini games. I don't expect them to be able to do that when it came to this game's release date. If you ask me, the game should have been like in development for at least another year, but I would still want to see these bosses be a bit more interesting when it comes to those mini games. Next, we have the combat. To be honest, I don't think the combat really is that great just because of how basic it is. Like I said before, it just feels very spammy. And for a combat system, it's not very smart to have it be very spammy in general. But then again, there isn't really that many bosses that really emphasize that sort of combat. So the first change I would do is give Sonic a more natural combat system. You see, the combat is very basic in the way it works. All this is just doing pre-made moves that don't really have that much of an effect on the opponents. It just feels very spammy. Like, sure, they get stronger and stronger over time, but like, it doesn't really feel like a proper combo, and it's just Sonic spamming different types of attacks on the opponent. So a way to fix that is to give Sonic a lot more interesting attacks. Here's another thing. Actually properly have him be able to lead from one to another. Because really, just having a bunch of attacks to just like statically, you play this attack and then you stop playing it and play the next one, that's pretty boring. Normally when combat is included in games, they would have a bit more attacks you're able to do in quick succession, or just be able to have attacks that are able to properly combo into one another. And I think this would be able to help and make Sonic's moveset a little bit more interesting. Heck, you could even include part of the moveset that could include like puzzle elements. Like there's specific defenses that the enemy would have, like an electric gate or I don't know, whatever else. And Sonic has specific attacks that can like work around those things. And maybe like there could be like moments where the enemy can have like multiple different defenses and Sonic like uses multiple different attacks to take them out to like try to deal with the enemy. I don't know, try to give him a little bit more of a puzzle element to the way he fights. And same thing goes for the enemies as well. And also give them a little bit of a unique like moveset to help them not just feel a little bit more fun to fight, basically put them on the level of Ninja but more, but also give these bosses a little bit more AI in them. It just feels pretty weird that I'm able to just constantly spam the same attacks over and over again on the same enemy, and I would prefer it if they had the ability to like have it to where the enemy would be able to respond to one of your attacks. Like I keep on using Cyclone and then the enemy just grabs Sonic and throws him into the air, and he just constantly does that until I use a different attack at Sonic. There's probably a lot more you could try doing when it comes to the combat, but those is just the main things I want to talk about. I also thought of like another thing that could also help by having it to be where when you enter a combat area with a boss or enemies, Sonic's control scheme changes slightly to where he doesn't have like stuff like the boost or whatever, and he just needs to get out of the area from the re-access sort of things. And since this game is all about you fighting the bosses so you can get portal gears to enter the stages, it does make a lot of sense to just simply force you to go into a new gameplay style that is more suited for this type of combat, you know? Also, another definite change I would do is the camera. Oh my gosh, the camera never faces the bosses. I think this was done just so it wouldn't be like just looking at the enemy or boss while you're just running right past them. But at the same time though, I kind of don't blame them that they wanted to do that just so you aren't like forced to like fight the enemy, because like there's a specific enemy in Ares Island that does that sort of thing, and it's like so distracting and gets annoying, but that's an enemy. You're kind of allowed to go past it, so I don't really think there's a reason for that camera to be there. Aside from like understanding how the enemy works, because you're supposed to homing attack its many different parts, even though that's really boring. Another criticism I'll give for is the ring system. Obviously, having 400 rings as your default ring count is not a good idea, because that is way too many rings. You have to take a lot of rings out of Sonic or reduce the amount of rings he already has. Like, I get it, they probably wanted to include this just so getting to blue boost mode wouldn't be that easy. But I mean, blue boost mode isn't really that much different from standard boost mode, so okay, sure, Sonic runs faster, but like, who really cares? Besides, with how easy it is to get to blue boost mode, aka side loop, whee! And also the fact that you can even turn on a infinite meter, whatever thing, that literally requires you to just side-loop in an infinity symbol, which makes me, why even have the boost meter to begin with if you are given the ability to just keep it permanently? Well, permanently with an asterisk, because it still goes away. It's more like a time limit. But again, what is the point of it? But back to the ring system, I think that one thing we can do to like fix the ring system is like heavily reduce Sonic's rings. Like make it 50 rings, and every single time Sonic gets hit, he loses like a few amount of those rings, depending on like how strong the attack is. I think that would be a smart way of having the health bar be a little bit more traditional instead of it being your Sonic sort of health. Maybe you could even make it unique where Sonic can't regain of his rings. Because like, you know, the Sonic cheese of like, "Whoa, no! I lost my ring! Got it! Okay, I'm ready to fight now!" Very cheesy, and for a combat system, it's not smart to have a ring system, because then you could just simply like stop the flow of the boss battle just to collect a ring and then re-enter it and kind of like ruin some of the challenge. Like, it was fine before because like most of the bosses were terrible, and heck, even later on they were able to include rings but yet still make the bosses fun to deal with and also prevent you from even collecting the rings, aka the bosses that required you to run all the time. Frontiers, I expect different with how the rings would work in bosses. And if you're wondering about the blue boost mode and how that'll be included, I mean, you could just simply take it out. If it's something that has like no real bearing on the gameplay at all except for making Sonic faster, I don't really think there's a point because it's Sonic. He normally goes fast. So fast that his acceleration is just broken, especially when you put at top speed. Like, I can't tell you how many times when I just did my recent recording for the bosses and I just like nudged the joystick and Sonic's like zooming forward, and it's like it just feels wrong on so many levels. Anyways, back to this health bar again. If you want to keep the blue boost mode, I got one idea that would be able to work. When you have the health bar all filled up and any extra rings you collect, just have them go into the blue boost meter, and when that fills up, Sonic will be able to run at fast speeds. I don't know. I have no idea how we'd be able to balance that or how that would work or what would be the point of that when it could just be more beneficial to just have Sonic running at that speed normally or something, but whatever. I think it's perfect. It's an idea, at the very least. So with the combat criticized and the health bar criticized, I have a certain fat cat I want to criticize too. So, in every single island, there is a unique cyberspace entrance that has a weird purple glow to it. And inside it's Big the cat. Big? What are you doing here? Why are you here? Did you lose the frog again? I don't see the frog. Did you become a hacker? Were you able to somehow bend this reality into your own will and create a pond? Why do I feel like if you had godlike powers, that's exactly what you do? So yeah, his appearance just makes absolutely no sense at all, and I have no idea why he's here to begin with. Heck, apparently, I guess he's just not canon to the actual story because Team Sonic never bothers like, oh wait, we forgot about Big. Let's go get Big, Tails. I don't know what's weirder. Sonic sounds like Ryan Drummond again, or the fact that he sounds very obnoxious when sounding like Ryan Drummond. I'm more so confused on why he constantly dances like a ballerina while running. Why is that the thing you're wondering? While in the big dimension, you're able to spend any purple coins you found in the hub world. Purple coins is a currency that you can find in the hub world for whatever reason. Like, did Big create these coins too with his godlike powers? So it already makes no sense that the portal entrance already looks like Big. It doesn't make... I'm asking way too many questions about Big the Cat. Why am I asking questions about Big the Cat? Once you exchange these coins, Sonic will be able to go into a fishing minigame, which is weirdly easy for whatever reason. Like, I get that Sonic Adventure wasn't really that popular with the big levels, but come on, it's just a simple button press over and over again. Why? Heck, there's even a meat cooking minigame, which I have no idea why it's here because it has like no actual purpose. Heck, I don't even know that's actually part of the game, or that's just simply unlocked through the DLC or something. I don't know. It's pointless, and I have no idea why it exists. Once you fish out a fish, or a spring, or whatever you find, not gonna lie, I do kind of like the classic references, but I wish there was more modern references. Heck, maybe even some Ooh, acorn. Once you attain one of these, you not just get a description for each of them, which obviously, weirdly enough, I had to read every single description, and I have no clue why because I never done this sort of thing before, but I guess I just gotta experience everything Sonic. You also get a certain amount of money from this, which you can be able to use in Big Shop. Kind of weird you have to do the fishing minigame to be able to do the shop. I don't get the point of it, but okay. But, well, in the shop, you're able to buy multiple things. 50 cocoa, 50 skill points, heart, defense, hey, wait a minute. Hey, you even get some lore with this too, as I mentioned before. Well, this is fine. Not gonna lie, I don't exactly hate that the shop's here, as the shop does give it a little bit of an easier way for new players to like go through the game, and heck, maybe there's certain parts of the game you just simply don't like. Like sure, the mini game itself is awful, but at least you're given the choice to be able to just pass parts of the game you simply don't like, and that's perfectly fine. Wait, why is it getting dark? Wait, are the enemies respawning? Wait, does that mean the bosses are respawning too? I guess I'm not going to be fighting all the bosses then. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So in this game, there's a unique, weird enemy respawner thing that also brings in a lot of crystals and just place it all everywhere. And you're supposed to run around and grab these crystals to be able to get more and more purple coins. Which, you can get so many purple coins that literally once you get into the next island, you can literally have almost or even more than 300 purple coins. Which is way too much. Like, completely? Why? Why is this here? It just feels like an easy way of just skipping the islands themselves. Like, sure, I'll give it the pass somewhat because these only all appeared like once per island while I'm just trying to complete these islands. So, if you're just playing the game casually, you're probably going to see it even less than that. But still, it's very weird that these just appear at all because they just give you so many purple coins. So yeah, thanks Big. Thanks for making the game a lot easier. Except it's not really because you have to actually be able to willingly do these minigames, and with how boring they are, I can't really see anyone being sane enough doing these without some form of distraction playing, like a YouTube video or something. So, yeah. And that's exactly what I did too, so there's that. Now, since that we talked about Big, you're probably thinking, oh, now we'll be talking about cyberspace. Actually, I want to say cyberspace for later because, to be honest, it's the best part of the game, but that's getting a little bit too ahead of myself. So, let's talk about the bosses. At the end of the island, you face off of a boss. Each boss is pretty unique from the last. You got one that is giant, one that is giant but flies, another one that has giant but sword, and the other one that is giant but gun. Obviously, some of the most creative designs ever. Jokes aside though, I do like these robots. They got pretty cool designs in all honesty. The bosses they come with is honestly pretty fun. Like, they're not very amazing, but they certainly do a lot more than your average Supersonic minigame. Normally, whenever there's a Supersonic minigame, it will just be hooey, ow, hooey, ow, hooey, ow. Frontiers does a bit better than other Sonic games though, as its Supersonic boss battles has actual gameplay elements from the combat being put inside the bosses. And honestly, it does kind of feel fun fighting these bosses. They aren't very complicated, but honestly, I'm kind of used to Supersonic boss battles not being very complicated. So I don't really mind that these aren't very hard or very interesting to fight. But hey, at least they're still fun to just watch and just listen to the music. It's not my type of music, so I don't really actually care about it, but apparently it's good. And then though there isn't really much substance to them, so there isn't really much of a reason to go back to them, aside from like if you're just playing the game for story reasons, which in my opinion is why a lot of people even play Sonic games casually. But even then, I still really like these fights just on their own. Especially with Sonic holding that giant sword. It's pretty cool seeing him just destroy that robot with his giant sword. Speaking of which, there's also the end, which is the final boss, and again, I don't really like it. Like, as a final boss, not just story reasons it's bad, but like, why did they just choose a random mini game and slap it in? It clearly shows that this game was rushed. I need to shut up about that, but again, clearly shows that it was rushed. Out of all the game modes in Frontiers, I'm kind of shocked that Cyberspace is the most fun in my opinion. Like, sure, the controls aren't perfect, as like if you look into Sonic's jump, you'll notice how it just feels very off in the way it controls. It just isn't as fluent. You don't have as much air control as you once did. But that's kind of remedied a bit because you like have the boost and stomp and all, and I tend to use those in combination to be able to realign Sonic. And the stomp even has this weird bounce bracelet like gimmick to it, which I have no clue why they decided to add it, but I love spamming it because I love the bounce bracelet for whatever reason. Like, the only issue I really have with the controls is how, like, the fact that the boost and the double jump are weirdly enough ground reliant. Like, you need to actually touch the ground again for you to be able to use those abilities again in the air. Which is very weird because like in other Sonic games, if I like boost into a spring, I would be able to boost again. But in Frontiers, whenever I boost into a spring, it just feels like I'm just hitting an invisible wall that I just simply can't go past through the boost and have to hold forward. So why do I like Cyberspace so much? Well, it's just simply because that's some of the best levels in the game. I just felt like that with how overpowered Sonic's boost and stomp is, I just think it's very cool to just be able to like fly over certain levels and be able to create my own shortcuts or whatever. It's just really fun to go against what the game intended me on doing just by making my own shortcuts, you know? It's very fun. It kind of gives me that sense of classic Sonic feel or Generations feel. While I wasn't able to create my own shortcuts, I was able to find multiple different shortcuts that I was a lot more free to doing because of the ranking system wasn't all about points. Which is actually another thing I want to talk about why I like the Cyberspace a bit more, is that they're all timed based, which isn't perfect as it causes the issue of, well, with how slow Sonic is after hitting an enemy, you pretty much have no points to just simply homing attack them when you just waltz right past them. Like, seriously, I know Sonic's the fastest thing alive, but really though, literally have to avoid enemies just so it goes faster? That's not really a smart way to include enemies, I'm just saying. A little point of criticism, if you're going to include enemies in a platformer game that requires you to go through the levels as fast as possible, make it aware attacking enemies is faster than just simply running past them. Then you actually have more of a purpose of having them than just simply helping you platform or whatever. They aren't as strict as like you would expect from other Sonic games, so there's that as well. Aside from like times where it isn't, because like there's certain levels, like the second level of the entire game where it's really hard and I have no idea why it's really hard. Sure, Windmill Isle Act 2 is very fun to play, but like the third level, which is clearly based off of some of Sonic Colors' levels, is way easier than this level has any right to be. And it's just like, why did they decide on this be the second level that you're able to S rank in? And another cool thing is that there's also red star rings and rings and just beating the level first, which would all grant you vault keys. And it kind of felt like that they took the different goals you had for getting like an S rank in any other Sonic game and just simply took them all out except for the time limit and just put them in like separate categories that are just like challenges. Which, for the type of game Sonic Frontiers is, where you have to collect as many objects as possible to be able to beat the game. Wait a minute. That's just a collectathon. Huh. whatever. Since the Sonic Frontiers is the type of game where you collect a lot of objects so you can actually beat the game, I think it's perfectly fine having all these little extra challenges that would have been normally used for getting the S-Ring you put into like side mini games that will help you actually 100% the game or something. It's fine and it's fun. And heck, there's even some levels that I really love. Like, look at one of the last levels. I tend to replay this level a lot because it's really fun with its level design. It's not amazing, but like, I just really love its level design, and it's very original, ironically enough. Especially that it's in a chemical plant zone area, but yeah, all the areas just reuse Sky Sanctuary Zone, Speed Highway Zone, Green Hill Zone, and Chemical Plant Zone, so it's fine. Aside from the fact that those areas are being reused in the first place, which is very lazy that they do that exact thing, but at this point I already established the game was clearly rushed, so I don't really care for that. Other levels I really like is honestly Skyrail and also Dragon Road Act 2, I think? Or was it Act 3? I'm not sure. I really like these levels in Frontiers. They honestly were pretty fun. Skyrail was only fun just simply because it's really fun just going as fast as possible down these rails. It feels more like a roller coaster since you don't really have to deal with like actually having to maneuver Sonic around the rails just so you can grab whatever collectibles are on the rails. Because, well, you no longer have the score-based ranking system, which honestly does kind of ruin SA2's levels a bit, but I still enjoyed it. And Dragon Road was really fun as it really emphasized the entire stomp a boost thing when you're trying to go as fast as possible with it. Because like the platforms are always spinning, so you can't like normally platform through it. So it's recommended you boost jump, boost stomp, boost yes around these platforms, which is honestly pretty fun trying to time it perfectly without accidentally falling off the stage. Now we're going into the elephant room I kept on alluding to in my previous segments of the video. The fact that Cyberspace constantly reuses level design, which I understand for lore purposes. The reason why they're doing this is because they're retracking Sonic's memories, but like Generations did that exact same thing, and yet they still had a very original level design. They just took the specific segments of like previous levels and just put them in different orders. Like Speed Highway would normally end off with Sonic running down the building and then going through the day section, while in Generations, Speed Highway would just have the wall running part just be in the middle of the level, and it's still nighttime in the rest of the level. You only see like a little smidge of daylight at the end of the level, and even then it's not really much. Frontiers sadly doesn't do that. It instead just simply reuses exact level design one-to-one, or at least as much as possible one-to-one from previous Sonic games. Like, this is almost exactly the same Metal Harbor, almost the exact same Windmill Isle Act 1. Like, I get it, they didn't have enough time to probably be able to make a lot of levels, and the game's main selling point wasn't cyberspace, it was the open zone. But since that cyberspace is the only part of the game I really enjoyed, that's kind of an issue. To be honest, I was actually going to say how much I don't really like the 2D levels that much. And while, sure, I don't think a lot of the 2D levels are as good as 3D levels because there isn't as much openness to what you can do with Sonic controls, since these controls work very well with you just jumping around, bouncing around, boosting around in open space and creating new shortcuts. I still think it works very well in 2D, as it's very fun just simply getting through everywhere. Just platforming, stomping. It's very fun to just go fast. Certain levels I do feel like are kind of weird with this control scheme, as I don't feel like they were designed with the control scheme in mind that Frontiers has, because like a lot of these levels aren't from Frontiers. But I still find a lot of these 2D levels just fun to play whenever they're just done right. By that I mean the ones that have a lot more platforms or whatever. I think that whenever a Frontiers level has more platforming to do in it, or there's a lot more interesting pathways you can take in it, I feel like that's when it's a lot more interesting, as I feel like that's a way you can really start taking advantage of Sonic's moveset. Because again, Sonic's run just, I kind of don't care for it. And while yes, I do think the controls are weird and all that, it kind of doesn't really affect it that much. It's kind of like this weird half and half situation where like half of me just thinks the controls are very weird and off and just like I just don't like this at all. Well, on the other side, it just feels like, my gosh, the controls are weird, but like I really love playing this cyberspace still. It's just fun using the controls to just skip through certain segments, just find new shortcuts, or just simply be able to platform. I feel like that the cyberspace here really does work well with platforming thanks to the stomp not actually stopping you in place. Which is pretty unique as like all previous Sonic games, the stomp doesn't actually stop you in place, and I really appreciated that was changed in Frontiers. Perfect? No, but I really like it. Does it feel really off though? Oh, certainly. Sonic really does feel off, especially when you don't have the speed change to make him faster. And even then, he still feels really off with the amount of times he just goes really slow, like attacking an enemy, for an example. Still really fun at the very least, and I'm really excited what they could do with Tails, Amy, and Knuckles. Especially with Amy, since I always had such a fondness towards the way Amy played. I just really want to see how just smacking a bunch of robots with a giant Pico Pico hammer would be like. That would be so fun. Overall, with Sonic Frontiers, it's a fine game. I don't really have any griping hates towards it, but to be honest, it's not very impressive either. The story feels like it tried its best, but it also feels like it was rushed in a bit. Cyberspace is really fun to play, but it also reuses a lot of levels to clearly show, again, it's rushed. Then you have the open zone that feels like there could have been cool ideas with its bosses and combat or whatnot, but it just doesn't really feel like it was able to fully utilize them. Again, feeling kind of rushed. But also in a way, you could also see it as it not being rushed. It's like this kind of weird scenario where it's clearly finished, but at the same time, it feels like the developers did not have enough time to actually be able to flesh out a lot of these things. More so focusing on like making the game polished when it comes to glitches. It kind of reminds me of that one time when Aaron Weber once said, "Oh, we're no longer rushing Sonic games." And it's like, that was a lie, because clearly you're still rushing these games. Sonic Origins, when that came out, that was clearly rushed. Sonic Colors Ultimate, that was clearly rushed. Sure, Sonic Colors Ultimate was made by a different team, and, well, it was also kind of had bad, well, development issues when it came to that game's development, but it still was released in a terrible condition that Sega should have at least noticed and try like doing something about it instead of leaving it the way it was when it released. And when you compare the way these games are to the way Frontiers is from when they released, it's kind of interesting to see how Sonic Frontiers technically wasn't rushed in a very glitchy manner. I feel like there was a little bit truth into what Aaron Weber said, but I felt like that what Sega thought at the time is that when people said the games were rushed, they actually meant the games were just very glitchy because of them being very rushed. So they made sure to delay the game so they could patch out all of those glitches. And actually, now think about it, I think that was Suzuka who advocated for that. So it's pretty impressive that I don't recall any glitches for this game or any notable ones. Aside from like one where Sonic has this weird reaction to a spring which causes him to just fly in one direction for an infinite amount of time. Maybe there's some other glitches inside the game that I don't know about, but still, it just kind of feels like the game was rushed in a way that wasn't before, but yet the game still suffers a lot from it. Speaking of which, this actually kind of reminds me of an argument I once had on the internet about if Sega has even learned their lesson about rushing games. Because in my opinion, the major issue when it comes to this franchise is how often the games get rushed. Ones that are just simply rushed to the point where they just have a lot of jank in them. And there's other Sonic games, Sonic 06, has a lot of glitchy and jankiness when it comes to the way the game's designed. And due to that, something like this really does ruin the game in its entirety, since that it was supposed to be a very ambitious game, and yet being rushed simply just caused it to be the game it is now. And while I wouldn't really say I'm wrong that Sega hasn't fully learned the right lessons, the thing is that I was kind of wrong that they weren't trying to learn the right lessons. The thing is that Sega did let this game be delayed by Iizuka just so it would be able to have an extended development time for all those glitches and jankiness to be taken out. And I could tell it was just simply that being taken out because, again, barely any glitches in Sonic Frontiers. But at the same time, though, I kind of felt like that was kind of more of the detriment to Sonic Frontiers, as again, taking out all the glitches and jankiness as the major focus point caused the game to still be very undercooked with many other things about it. And I felt like that they should have put that extra development time into actually trying to finish the game, or much more preferably, they had a much longer development time just to be able to work those stuff in. And heck, I wonder if there is actually more jankiness to this game, but simply because if they added stuff that would make the game easier, would also kind of alleviate some of that jankiness as well. Sure, I guess that could be the case, but then again, that kind of will also explain why the game gets very easy even in hard mode. Simply because that a lot of what's supposed to be the jankiness, or whatever is supposed to be more challenging, that just so happened to be janky, is now taken out because now we have the game being a lot easier. Like, I found it a lot more fun fighting one of the bosses by having a lot less rings for Super Sonic, because the 400 rings made it way too easy than having just a smaller amount of rings. And that kind of just continues when it comes to the rest of Sonic Frontiers. It just felt like when they were trying to erase all that jankiness and glitchiness, it just simply took up way too much of the rest of the time for the game's development. Same time, just simply not having enough development time to begin with. Like, even if they did put the development time into like developing the rest of the game, unless they rushed it, I don't really see them actually being able to finish the game in time to make it feel not underwhelming. Unless it'll have a lot of glitchiness and jankiness. So yeah, it kind of feels like it kind of is a lose-lose situation now thinking about it. The thing is, Sonic Frontiers is a game that does suffer a lot of issues, and there's a lot of things that could definitely be more improved upon just simply from the game having a longer development time. And that's really just a lesson Sega needs to learn when it comes to these games. Just don't rush these titles and they wouldn't be as bad. Sure, it got the success it deserves, or at least the Sonic series deserves, because the game was able to do very well with the public audience that now there's a lot of people who are not just Sonic fans again, but there's also just a lot more love going towards the franchise than there ever has been before. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of Sonic Frontiers, and yet I still tried participating in the Game Awards trying to get Sonic Frontiers to beat Genshin Impact. I still don't understand what Genshin Impact was doing there 2 years late, but whatever. But still, Sonic Frontiers is a game that was very popular. And to be honest, if it can at least do that, make it the series popular again, then I don't have any real issues with it. I'm actually a lot more satisfied and happy with the game that it is. I just wish that the game had a longer development time, and Sega learns that just have longer development times and don't worry about releasing new Sonic games every single year or whatever. Oh, well, every few years in this case. I mean, if they want more Sonic games, they could just port more Sonic games, or they could just simply development teams that could work on more side projects or whatever. Like, Sonic Mania was a fine idea to be a side project to the main series game. Sonic Frontiers is a Sonic game that feels like it still suffers from being rushed. Thankfully, it's not that bad when it comes to being rushed when it comes to the glitches and jankiness, and was able to help save the franchise from having another game ruin its reputation even more than it already has. Is it great? No. Is it awful? Also no. But it is rushed, and it is underwhelming.